And we were talking about Mercedes-Benz, and I think when ChatGPT exploded on the scene in the fall of 2022, it was like the Mercedes AMG 1 that had just sort of, taken off. But even before ChatGPT, this is a very, very knowledgeable room here, you know that wasn't the beginning of AI. I mean, AI has been around for decades, and even a few months before ChatGPT, there were spectacular AMG 1s that were taking off. For instance, DeepMind had predicted the ability to predict the structure of every protein in the human body. Just think about the possibilities that might unfold. So if you imagine that incredible Formula One level car, sort of racing onto the highway, and suddenly it starts hitting these rural roads where there are lots of crossroads. And this is where we are now, where there's this high-performance car which is going through a number of different crossroads. And several crossroads to think about. I mean, right now, of course, money is still pouring in. OpenAI, last time I checked, was $157 billion, maybe still climbing in terms of value. The amount of money that was spent on generative AI models this year was double of last year, and so on. So the enthusiasm is still unabated. At the same time, the folks who are selling this stuff to us, Goldman Sachs, drops a report kind of saying, hey, wait a minute, all this $1 trillion that is being spent on Gen AI, we may not actually see much to justify all that. Goldman Sachs. A lot of concerns from some of the top names in the field about what AI might do to the human race, as in it might go extinct if basically autonomous weapons take control and have their fingers on the red button. Speaking of the red button, there are two people who aim to have their fingers on the red button in a few days, maybe a few weeks. We'll find out who that might be. If it is Trump, then you might actually have Elon Musk driving AI policy in the White House. If it is Harris, then Kamala Harris actually has been the AI czar in the Biden administration. She's been practically in every major meeting that the White House has run. And a lot of her focus has been on AI safety and on what it does to social inequalities and misinformation. And she should know because she's kind of been the target of a lot of misinformation personally. So it's pretty clear that come this election, AI is going to have a pretty significant role in the policy and the regulatory agenda. So lots of crossroads that this massive car is going to run into. So what I thought I'd do is spend a little bit of this afternoon talking about not artificial intelligence, but artificial insecurity, which is a combination of a number of different issues that would be on the minds of executives, on policymakers, and just ordinary people, folks that I've been speaking with over the last several years. Just by way of a little bit of background, I run a big global research project I've been doing it for the last 12 years called Digital Planet. What we try to understand is how technology is shaping lives and livelihoods around the world. Specifically, we cover 125 countries, and every year we put out a number of different indices trying to capture different aspects of the technology. So our most recent measure, which we call the Digital Evolution Index, which is a measure of how 125 countries around the world are moving from a physical past to a digital future. The way to kind of read this very complicated chart is the vertical axis is the state of digital evolution of any given country. The horizontal axis is the rate at which that is changing. So the further north you are, the more digitally evolved you are. The further to the right you are, the faster you're moving. Okay, there are 125 countries mapped across this. You will not be able to read what they are, but suffice it to say the ones that are on the top right are kind of in a nice place. And these are the countries that we call the standout countries. The ones that are back here are the ones that are in somewhat, some difficulty, the digital doldrums, as it were. The ones that are here are really the investor's dream or the entrepreneur's dream, because plenty of headroom for growth, and a lot of momentum. So without necessarily focusing on any of this, so this research, we refresh it every 2 years. And this year, we found two very surprising elements. two polar elements of the United States being the top country in terms of the state of digital evolution, and China being the top country in terms of the rate of digital evolution, and both United States and China actually in the standout zone. This was not the case the last time we did this measure, 2 years back. China was much lower. The United States was actually eclipsed by several other countries, particularly Singapore. The big driving factor that has made a change in these two countries has been AI. It's been the fundamental factor that has essentially sort of overturned the basic elements of what goes into the digital ecosystem of any given country. There's a lot packed in here. I have any questions you have, happy to chat about it afterwards. But basically, this is an introduction to what AI is doing to the digital planet overall, and we are increasingly becoming an AI planet. And of course, there is kind of all the big names in the industry are jumping up and down, either in hope or in fear, and instilling both hope and fear in us. You know, we are creating God, says Goddard. We are summoning the devil, says Elon Musk. We are reinventing fire, says Sundar Pichai. So on and on. And we've heard all of this many times over. So the three questions that I'd ask you to sort of think about is, one is, can we trust AI? Can we trust AI? So don't just think about all the money that's being poured into building bigger, faster, higher-performing LLMs, or if not LLMs, the specialized edge devices. Yes, that's going to continue to happen. More money is going to keep coming in. However, are we investing in several other areas that are critical to the deployment of this technology for productive use in society? And for that, a critical barrier that needs to be crossed is trust. Are we investing in building trust among AI users? Second is, does AI increase inequalities? This is going to become a fundamental problem as the policymakers finally start focusing on what this technology is doing to society. Just like now, after the fact, they're all realizing that, hey, we should have done something about social media back when social media were just taking off. So that realization is going to come a whole lot earlier. And finally, you know, the role of regulation and public policy. Can we do something from a public standpoint to tame AI? And can the regulator not go head-to-head with the innovator, but can the regulator actually be a complement or a partner with the innovators and the investors? So with those three questions, I will just sort of race through a few elements of what we've been learning as we've been trying to study these issues across the world. First of all, if you think about trust in AI companies, it's actually not looking very good. It's been dropping steadily. It's been dropping steadily. And it's dropped across the world. It's definitely dropped in the United States. In terms of what AI might do to the human race, it's not just the doomers. It's not just Jeff Hinton who's saying that this is the real danger. Even the most optimistic, the net optimists, about half of the net optimists, peg the probability of the end of the human race due to AI at 5%. So just imagine, many of us are going to get on a plane right now. I have to get on a plane in a few hours. If the probability of that plane falling out of the sky was 5%, I'm going to stay here in Irvine for the rest of my life. Okay, so this is, I'd really think twice. I mean, these are experts who had been surveyed for this. So I'd like to better understand what the heck is going on here. If you just think about where the major risks are. Having talked to the various application communities, here are some of the big things that we are seeing. Performance risk, something that people worry about, and particularly people who are in the information industries, people who are in academics, people who are in consulting, people who are analysts, people who are essentially trying to, instead of producing this page using human beings, they're producing this page in combination with machines. They're worried about errors and hallucinations. The hallucination rate hasn't really been going down all that much. In terms of blind spots, they're seeing blind spots that are coming up. This is essentially the model being trained on a data set, and then when it meets the real world, it just doesn't recognize the real world data. And then it does bizarre things. And then, of course, there's mis/disinformation. So that is sort of an ongoing concern among the community that is essentially the knowledge information community. And these are some of the major issues that they worry about. If you think about the community that, we discussed that a little bit earlier about applications of AI in the healthcare domain, and particularly if you think about radiologists and whether radiologists might adopt AI. Having talked to a whole bunch of radiologists, they are actually not that eager to jump on the AI bandwagon, not because their jobs are going to get displaced. They're looking to have some help. They're looking to have some, essentially a partner. However, they worry about a whole bunch of things. The biggest thing they worry about is the black box phenomenon. Well, basically, a radiologist, if a machine is telling them that this lesion is benign, and they kind of say, well, I don't quite understand the logic with which this machine got to that conclusion, so I'm not going to trust it. And I will actually put in the effort to do another check to see if this lesion is benign or malignant. So, and there's now a whole field in radiology in trying to get transparency, in trying to get explainability in machine-read imagery in the radiological field. There's concern about the increasing concentration of the industry behind AI. Basically, what we are seeing is just the way the business is coming together. There's essentially 6 companies at most, or give or take, that are essentially setting the table for everybody. And we're seeing year after year the startup community is just not getting a toehold in the industry because of the underlying economics and the dynamics of the business. The problem of bias, essentially the future is the past. This problem is not going away. And particularly in the healthcare space, this is something that people really worry about a lot, that we're just propagating biases from the past. The issue of privacy, of course, something that is a constant worry, issues of safety, and of course, concerns about ethics. Now, people keep talking about, let's get together an ethical board. The United Nations is going to do this, and they're going to put a committee together. The natural question to ask is, whose ethics are we talking about? So the 2 biggest producers of AI in the world are United States and China. An ethical framework in the United States is considered dangerous in China, and vice versa. So whose ethical framework are we going to apply in the context of a technology that is borderless, that is going to be used all over the world, and sometimes is going to be used in ways that we won't even be able to tell. So these are issues that are fundamental stumbling blocks for a lot of professionals who can benefit from this technology, but they're holding back. Then there are worries that different communities have and the policymakers have. And they're looking at some of the macro elements, the macro risks. And when you think about the macro risks, they worry about the future of work and wages. I know that this was something that folks worried about like a few years back. And then somehow that got lost, because now everybody's so excited about the future of AI that, the future of work, oh, yeah, sure, we'll figure out a way to take all these people who are displaced and we'll retrain them and something else is going to happen to them. In the meantime, nobody has any idea as to what that retraining is going to look like, but we are sort of, we are kicking the can down the road. But this is the real issue. A second issue is an issue of national security. You look at the conversations that are happening between the United States and China, zero. Nothing is happening. They're going behind closed doors, and they have a 6-hour meeting, and the meeting it concludes with no recorded minutes and no next steps. And these are the 2 nations which do have the potential to have an autonomous finger on the red button. State surveillance, this is a growing problem. This is a growing problem across the world. More and more countries around the world, including democratic nations, are using AI and facial recognition technology, often for very good reasons, but increasing use of the technology for state surveillance, which is causing a lot of concerns about what citizens' rights might be in an AI-saturated world. And finally, of course, this is a topic that has been brought up several times. Everybody talks about the energy impact of AI, but no one does anything about it. We all say, oh yeah, you know what? I'd rather not go to Google search. I'll just go to perplexity.ai because it gives me such a beautiful answer. None of us even thinks about the fact that that change that he just made caused yet another, kind of a few hundred, watts or megawatts of energy to be utilized, to do a parallel search. So we're not factoring in this enormous impact that that AI is going to have. And of course, these are really important considerations. These shouldn't be showstoppers for AI, but these are the kinds of issues that are now going to be playing in the minds of a lot of decision makers and policymakers. And it's something that all of us in industry and in academia and policy need to be thinking about and getting ahead of the problem, as opposed to in the back, after the problem has emerged, or maybe adoption hasn't taken place at the same rate, kind of saying, okay, we need to do something about this. So there are a few solution elements that we sort of thought about. And of course, there is accountability, oversight, and independent bodies that are needed. very important part is that we're spending a lot of our time and energy and money in training models. We need to be also simultaneously be spending time, energy, and money on training the humans, the pilots that accompany the co-pilots. We need to make investments to reskill, re-educate, not just talk about it, actually do it, and actually figure out where those displacements are going to happen, and surgically go in and figure out what are we going to do to shift the labor force. Establish regulatory frameworks, I'm going to come back to that later, and create mechanisms to facilitate a wider sharing of the economic gains. Because guess what? We can't imagine this away. AI, the introduction of AI, is going to cause major social displacements, and we need to acknowledge it and not just assume that, you know what, it's going to be taken care of. I'm going to come back to a little bit of this in the time I have. So this is leading me to the next point, which is could AI exacerbate the problem of inequality? Now, the question of inequality is high on our minds in the presidential year. This is the topic that neither of the candidates really have a good answer to, but it's a question that everybody's worried about because it's a kitchen table problem for people whose jobs have been lost because of the natural shifts in the industrial workforce and globalization. It's also whether you believe that immigration is a problem or not, a big driver of immigration is the global inequality, the gaps between people who live outside the rich country and a rich country. If Haiti were a middle-class economy, or Haiti was a rich country, we wouldn't have all these problems with Haitians, whatever it is they're doing. Maybe they're legal immigrants doing very good work in Springfield, Ohio, or anything else. This would be a non-issue if there was less inequality around the world. Now, what we have seen is in the last 30 years, there's actually been, and this may come as a bit of a surprise to people, a decrease in global inequality, And that's because there's been a rise in the middle class, particularly in large populous countries, India, China, and many parts of Asia. Now, if you just think about that change that has happened in the last 30 years, largely on the backs of growth of a manufacturing sector and growth of a services sector, both of those vectors are going to get killed. Or at least dampened by AI, because AI goes and targets manufacturing through automation and a lot of routine services and back office work, and that's exactly the growth vectors that had created a rise in the middle class in the developing world. So that is an issue that we really don't have much to say about. So instead, we actually have very, very thoughtful people who command a very visible presence, actually telling us a story that is much rosier. Kind of saying, you know what, AI is actually going to cause the end of expertise, and it's going to cause a compression in wages. There is an expectation that no matter where you are, you could be a smallholder farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, and you could use AI to do all kinds of wonderful things on your farms, and thereby and get better. So these are all conceptually true. These are all doable. The issue is who's going to invest in getting AI to the small-scale farmers? Who's going to invest in reducing compression between middle-income earners and high earners? What we need to think about is the impact of AI within occupations, across occupations, within nations, and across nations. And this itself is a conversation that's going to take 3 hours. I'm not going to go into it. However, a few top-line statistics is, and these are all still emerging patterns. About 80% of the workforce, 10% of their tasks are going to be exposed to AI. What does exposure mean? We don't really understand. If it's a complementary, it's a place where AI is complementary. Your productivity might go up and your income might go up. If it's a substitute, then guess what? You're out of luck. So there are all kinds of differences that are going to happen within occupations. Across occupations, if you're a dishwasher, if you're a home healthcare worker, you know what? You're in luck because AI is not going to do much to your job. But for some other occupations, it's quite a problem, particularly if you're a back office customer service agent in the Philippines or in India. It could be a real problem. And so this is an issue that's going to affect both occupations and nations. And of course, I haven't even talked about the non-income aspect of inequality. inequality. And that has to do with the socioeconomic inequalities. Much of the data that is used to train our AI models is data that already holds a massive amount of socioeconomic bias and asymmetry. And that is just going to keep on getting propagated, despite all the good intentions attempts to try and neutralize the biases. And then the question is, before too long, these models get so far that no one can then go back and reverse engineer them and figure out, okay, where those gaps are and how do we neutralize them. And my worry is that train may have already left the station. And we are potentially looking at baking in the past into the future. Solutions? Well, we get more solutions from, again, very well-placed people. A great future isn't that complicated. We need technology to create more wealth and policy to fairly distribute it. Everything necessary will be cheap, and everyone will have enough money to be able to afford it. That's simple. More recently, Sam Altman had a concept of universal basic compute as a way to solve the problem. So I'm saying, that's like, these are some of the smartest people in the world we know. Universal basic compute. So that's a bit of a head scratcher, and if I'm sounding skeptical, for good reason. So there are a whole bunch of solution elements that we need to be thinking about. Obviously, we need to be thinking about small AI. How do we take targeted approaches to AI at the edge, which sort of diffuses the control of a concentrated industry, devaluation of expertise, which compresses the income, widening the geography of AI. AI is being produced not just in the US and China. It's actually being produced across at least 40 different countries. How do we spread that, and how do we use that local knowledge to then solve for local problems? So there is a huge possibility there. And finally, there's an emerging, very important trend that is particularly coming out of countries like India and Estonia with digital public goods and digital public infrastructure, where essentially you're making certain elements of the technology stack like electricity, like a public utility. So if you can put AI into that mix, people could actually grab their portion of AI and then customize it to their use, and it could become the equivalent of universal compute. Okay, am I out of time? Couldn't tell because the clock reversed itself. Amazing that the time-space continuum is continuing to move. So in terms of regulation, this is another 3-hour talk. Chuck Schumer led a year-long process in which he talked to at least 150 experts to determine an AI roadmap. And what did they come up with? Nothing. It's basically a bunch of blather, which any one of us could have written after about a couple of cups of coffee and maybe a beer or two. And I'm seriously exaggerating, but there's not much that Congress has done. And so what we end up with is the states sort of jumping into action. So you have one state rushing ahead, another state falling behind, and then of course you're right here in California. You can see the back and forth that's happening here. And as a result, you have a patchwork quilt of states essentially with ad hoc regulations rushing in. There's no consistency, no compatibility. So what does that mean? If you're a startup with a tremendous idea, you have to figure out how the regulations vary between California and Nevada and Oregon and Mississippi, and you can't do that. So it's a barrier to entry to the smart startups. And it's the same when you look at the way regulations are evolving around the world. The European Union has raced ahead. The United States is sitting on its hands. China is, get closer to a framework. India goes forward, backwards. So, if you're a global player with lots of lawyers, lots of money, you can survive this. If you are not, too bad. So that regulation, paradoxically, is adding to industry concentration, which is going to require more regulation down the road, at least a lawsuit or two. Okay, so there are inconsistent rules. There's a cross-border paradox, which is something that I particularly worry about, which is the major governments like the EU and the US wow, time has gone up. Is this negative time? Oh, it is. I'm so sorry. I'm out of time. There are lots of problems with the regulators as well. And I do believe that we have some solution elements. We need more standardization. We need conversations across regulators. We need a form of digital multilateralism. Traditional multilateralism hasn't worked, but digital multilateralism, this is the time to get ahead of the problem. And AI multilateralism and regulators need to be able to think beyond their individual narrow jurisdiction. With that, I'll leave you with 2 questions, and the questions being, what excites you most about AI? Of course, we've seen so many use cases that I'm sure are inspirational and exciting. I'd like to also ask you to think about what worries you the most.